Welcome to Think Smart with TMFG. I'm Mike Connon. I'm here with John Iaconetti, Senior Financial Advisor at the McClelland Financial Group of Assante Capital Management. Today, John, what I was going to talk about is the middlemen.
Yeah.
I guess we have to call them middle persons now.
Yeah, middle people in businesses.
Middle people,
yeah.
whatever is in between there. Now, the reason I was thinking about this was I did a renovation in my house.
Mm-hmm.
And over my life, my dad was always in construction. So
Yeah.
I have a bit of an idea how construction works. And, at the time, he was a partner in a steel business plant, and then he was in New York. He managed a large painting company, and he was what they call an estimator. So he was the person that would estimate what a job would do and cost. And he used to show me how he would do it. It was interesting. He'd walk into a building in New York, and he'd walk through each office that had to be done, and he'd have a little piece of paper, and he'd write down hours. It was all man hours, right?
Yeah.
So man hours, then he'd go and add material afterwards. He'd put them all together. And then he'd throw a premium on top of that for the materials and a premium for the man hours. They were paying people at that time $10 an hour. I think he'd charge out at $15 or $18 an hour.
Very different nowadays.
Much different nowadays. And that's how they'd come with how much it was going to cost to do the job. That was how that business worked. The steel business was a bit of a different business. The steel business, and this is how the construction business used to work. People would bid on a job.
Yep.
So someone wanted to build a building, let's say a factory. They come out and say, okay, I want to build a factory. Who has the capacity to build this factory? And different companies would bid on this, right? And they'd all bid and put their bids in. And the people would go take a look at all the bids and decide who they want to use. And your idea was you want to bid low enough where you could actually get the job, but you didn't want to build so low where you lose money.
Yeah, you still need to be profitable
this
for
was
yourself.
The tricky thing.
Yeah.
And along that, it was risky because you
absolutely.
could try to get the job and end up killing yourself or bankrupting yourself. So it's a very risky business that way. And what they would do is when you got those jobs, the next thing, once you actually landed that contract, you would try to whittle down all the trades to try to get your profit margins up. So you'd see how cheap you could do different things, which ideally wasn't the perfect solution.
Yeah, and very different than how it's being done now, whereas, like you mentioned before, a lot of that is trying to make things a bit more affordable so you get selected, versus now it's a very different setup where people are, doing fairly well for themselves, and that's where the middleman conversation comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, we recently did a renovation on the office. So we got the modern version of how this stuff works. And essentially you have a contractor who basically you hire to be the person who takes a job. He doesn't give you a quote on how much the job is going to cost. What he does is he goes and gets you quotes on all the different portions of the job.
Yeah.
And then he puts a markup on those portions, and also puts a markup on materials in there, and that all goes on. So it's a different type of way, which really goes and eliminates all the risk from the contractor side.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because now he's not, whatever it costs, and he's going to make money no matter what.
Exactly. And they're not doing the work. They're just kind of facilitating the whole
And
situation.
there'll be fees built in for doing that, and low risk. And, you never even know what's being paid back in the construction industry. I know it's known to be a very legitimate industry.
Yeah, a lot of kickbacks. I'm sure the pockets are getting lined.
There's a lot of people doing things for each other in there. So it's a bit hard to deal with that. And it's funny, I just noticed this as I was doing construction, I realized the old school way of doing business, they have all these middlemen between yourself and actual product. And you pay a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And every step along the way, it gets added onto, right?
And this is the construction industry is obvious, but that's not the only industry this has happened to over time.
Yeah.
Middlemen have become part of our life. So let's think of other businesses. Like banks. Have you dealt with banks lately?
Try not to, but it's hard to operate in Canada without dealing with it. And just like you said, it's not you deal with someone at the front of the counter, but there's a lot of different steps that getting any sort of product has to go through before it actually gets to you.
Like your branch doesn't have as much power anymore.
No.
Your branch is really just, I guess, just an entry point to a bunch of people behind the scenes that are doing things. So they don't really have any pull anymore.
Yeah. Well, they're doing their best to get people even out of branches, right?
Yeah.
It's getting to that point where, like you said, it's just you're a figurehead at the branch.
Yeah,
right?
and they're nice people and everything, but the problem is they don't have any power.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, you're going through all these different people that are being paid between yourself and the end product. And every time you go through one of those stages, it costs you money.
Yeah.
If you look at other things, if you go into a Home Depot, it's interesting. Sometimes things you buy at Home Depot they say that's an online order. And you figure, okay, well, it would be delivered to the store. But you don't realize when something's online, Home Depot doesn't have anything to do
Oh,
with it
exactly.
anymore. So
They're
as soon
just
as something
named.
goes wrong, you're out the door and you're dealing with about 10 other people that you never knew were involved in the transaction. And this is, again, have more people involved in that too.
Yeah, and in that scenario, I mean, we use Home Depot as just an example, but even Amazons of the world or anything that's really going to be online in the terms of shopping. I mean, you're going from having it go from a manufacturer to a distributor to the retailer and then to you. Everything along those ways, you're getting a markup.
And I'm not even calling a home, as you said, I'm not calling it
Yeah.
Home Depot.
Yeah.
Home Depot is a great company. I wouldn't have a house without them, I don't think.
You're just thinking about the home reno still,
I'm
yeah.
just thinking about just where they are, and that's just how businesses work that way. You were talking about grocery stores and
Yeah, grocery stores as well. I mean, that's going to be a very similar situation. Well, I mean, we have some clients of ours that do work within farming or work within the food sector. A farmer could sell their goods for fairly low prices, but that usually has to go to a food processing plant or a processor that's going to package everything, and then it's going to get to a distributor, and then at that point, it's going to get to the shelves. And we know the reputation that the grocers have now in terms of markups and how inflation has really gotten out of hand there. There's a lot of markups around the way where, maybe from a farmer, it's selling goods for 10 cents on the dollar and you end up paying a couple dollars for it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the farmer's market's a great idea because it unfortunately doesn't seem to be much cheaper.
Yeah.
But I think at least the farmer's getting the profits rather than
Exactly.
all the middle people getting the profits in between.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Other thing I find, have you ever bought a used car?
Yes, I have, yeah.
The used car market
Yeah.
used to be very simple. You'd buy a car and it was a pretty quick turnover. Nowadays, when you sell a used car, usually the dealer isn't going to take it and sell it anymore. They're going to put it to an auction house. The auction house is going to resell it to another dealer. They're going to take a profit on there. So everyone's taking their little pieces on the way. It was funny, I bought my daughter a car back in September, and at least it was a lemon, right?
Yeah.
And I think I paid $12,000 or $13,000 for it. And I had everything fixed as I was going in, and I think I put about another $6,000 into it. And I was just kicking myself. And finally I decided I'm going to cut bait on this, and we're going to go and say, let's go and move on. So I went to go trade in for another car, and they offered me $4,000 for it. It had about 1,000 kilometers on it since I paid $11,000 or $12,000 for it. But then he explained to me, as I'm sitting down with the guy, he goes, yeah, well, we're not going to sell it here. We'll sell it to one of the auction houses, and then they'll go sell it to a different dealer that would give this level of car. They'll do something to sell it to another person that goes between. So all of a sudden, there's a whole bunch of people being paid in this transaction, and that's how you go from 11,000 to 4,000. So there's $7,000 worth of money missing in this transaction.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things you have to really watch out for.
Yeah,
because,
now things have started to change a little bit in terms of kind of cutting out those middlemen, specifically using the used car example. I mean, Auto Trader being one, Clutch is another one, but even then, there's still costs that are going to be associated to any producer, I guess, or any one of those companies that are facilitating the deal, right?
I mean, one of our ideas has always been in-house here. We've always tried to cut out as many middlemen as we can.
Exactly.
We use an approach that's very cheap from a management point of view, and that means you're not paying as many people in between yourself and your money. And
exactly.
The least amount of people you have between those transactions, the more money you're going to have at the end of the day. I watch these deals go through. Some people talk about private corporations. And whenever you look at these deals and you go into them, you start to count all the middlemen that are being paid.
Yeah.
So if you ever go to one of these prospectuses, I'm talking about private corporations, if you go to one of these real estate deals and you start to reel about the real estate details and who gets paid in these real estate deals. Well, there's the guy who's selling the contract. There's the guy who puts together. There's all these different people that are being paid along the way.
Yeah.
The management company, this company, that company, that company. And at the end of the day, what's left?
Not much. It's unfortunate, but
the reality is a lot of times the simpler you can get and the less people you can involved in a transaction, the further along you're going to be.
Yeah, we use the analogy specifically within finance. It's like kind of like a bar of soap. The less you touch it, the more you're going to have at the end. And that's very much what we have here in terms of the middleman. Everyone who's going to get their hands on that piece, there's going to be a little bit left, for you at the end of the day, right? So the more you can eliminate those middlemen, the better off you'll be.
So I guess the moral of the story with finances, with groceries, with cars, with construction, whatever you do, the simpler you can keep it, probably the better.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to another episode of Think Smart with TMFG. Thank you very much and have a great day.